So our participants today are Margaret Leinen, Carlos Nobre, Jean Jouzel, Charles Kennel, and Antonio Bulasaki. So now we'll basically open up the floor for questions from reporters in the room. Do we have any questions?
Bud Ward with Yale Climate Connections. I attended the actual session an hour and a half ago, or at least most of it, and I thought the 800-pound gorilla in the room was missing. One of you mentioned concern, I think it was Jean Jouzel, concern about America's continued commitment to Paris. But I was expecting much more. Maybe it came afterwards in Q&A, maybe it didn't. But could you elaborate some? And what you expect, what is the implication if the Trump administration sticks with a potential plan to pull out, or if it stays signed onto it, just not to do anything in terms of reaching its commitment? What are the real implications of that?
Yes, so it works, I think, yes. So if U.S. withdraw from the Paris Agreement, normally it should take 3 years and 1 year more, but also they can U.S. can withdraw from the Climate Convention. So the Paris Agreement is ratified, and there is more than 100 countries, not far from 120 country signings. They represent more than 70% of emissions. So even if U.S. withdraw, the Paris Agreement will enter to force in 2020. This will not change, except that, and this shows the importance to have the Paris Agreement ratified before Marrakesh, before indeed the election of the U.S. election, because we could, if it wouldn't have been the case, indeed, we should have think of some country who would have never ratified. So it was very smart to have this ratified before Marrakesh. But if U.S. leave, I don't think other country will leave, and the Paris Agreement will enter to force. The problem with is not the only problem. If for example, U.S. leave IPCC, it would be very important. If it's also very important for the support of developed countries towards developing countries, $100 billion. So it would be a disaster. But strictly speaking, the Paris Agreement will go ahead without the U.S. We are not in the same situation as the Kyoto Protocol, because it was not ratified. So Bush said, okay, I don't ratify it. It was okay, but we have in different situations. The agreement will go ahead.
Any other questions?
Let me just add to that. Remember that part of our commitment in the Paris Agreement includes some of our bilaterals, like the U.S.-China agreement. So there are some, I think that's a place where the consequences of reneging on the U.S.-China agreement would be something that would trigger some more serious thought. And so I think that, and you also have, because these are nationally determined voluntary contributions, there may be many elements in there that would go forward anyway because they're not part of federal government. For example, all of the commitments that states have made in the U.S. I think we're going to hear tomorrow that California fully intends to continue on its path. So there are a lot of, when you unpack that, there are a lot of elements of it that may well continue. But I fully understand the implication of the U.S. saying we're not going to be involved, and how that would reverberate in international politics. But I think that's a different issue than the U.S. Proceeding with some of the things that are on the list for contributions.
Yeah, I'm David Perlman from the San Francisco Chronicle. Mr. Bousalaki, what are your thoughts now for the coming year in view of the kind of research that's going to be necessary to somehow construct a path forward from Paris?
So thanks very much for the question. As we discussed on the panel, the sooner we implement mitigation, then the less negative emissions we need later in the century. So we need to study when we're going to have mitigation in earnest, the rate of mitigation, the prospects for negative emissions. That's one part of the solution space. The other one is we need to have adaptation as part of our solution set, and the information, standing up in an information system. So as we discussed, to provide information on adaptation with the best possible uncertainty estimates for various sectors of the economy and a range of societal benefit areas. And then lastly as well, we need a monitoring system for carbon, and one more. And that is, as given all the sort of problems of governance and the ethics, we still need to have a very serious research approach to geoengineering. In the event that mitigation and adaptation fall short, given the importance of the 2-degree threshold, we also need to adequately research. Not saying implement, but adequately research. What are the ramifications, how do you do it, and what are the unintended consequences of geoengineering?
In my view, the absence of the U.S. from international negotiations for a short period of time, 4, 5, 8 years, from the negotiation point of view is serious, but it's not fatal. But the issue will be after Paris. The agreement, the larger agreement that will be needed later, may not go forward without enthusiastic United States participation. The other thing I'd like to say is that the genius of the Paris Agreement is that it distributed the initiative for taking climate action to the countries, and below that to the regions. And so in the case of America, there will be places like California that will continue to do the work and continue to advance the technology and continue to make contributions to the international community, whatever form the international structures will take place. So that I think that when our students at Marrakesh, the election occurred during the meeting, and our Scripps students were there. They all came to me and asked, I'm going to have a job in the future. And I pointed out to them that the United States was an unusual country with an extremely dominant industrial sector and a distributed method of governance with the states, and that there would be plenty of opportunities for us to show leadership, even at the international level, but perhaps not in the diplomatic arena for the near term.
Next question.
Nicosa from Andisha TV, LA. My question is, how are you expecting countries struck by drought, water crisis, and war in the Middle East, like Yemen and Syria, to comply with the agreements in Paris, and other countries in the region that are not that stable in the near future?
Who answers? So, yeah, Margaret, you can. No, I mean, I think, I don't know exactly what is the commitment of Syria, but we understand the problem when you have conflicts in this region. Or I don't know. I have no clear answer, but I don't think the commitment are very voluntary. I mean, I think it's more an adaptation, but they have real problem with climate change in this country, and as you know, I mean, some scientists things that the droughts that they had in Syria in the beginning of the century was at least part of, at the origin, partly at the origin of the conflicting situation in Syria. So climate change is really important for this country, but I have no clear answer to your question.
The question of how can we expect them to respond, I think, points out one of the key issues, at least in my personal view, and that is that it is healthy societies that create healthy environments and healthy climate policies. And so a concern for these kinds of issues, I think, going forward has to be folded into the work that we do in climate and other areas of sustainability. We have to look after the health of the societies as well as the health of the environment, and if we don't do that, we're in real trouble. I think that's a goal for the future.
David Kramer, Physics Today. Mr. Busalachi, you mentioned the carbon monitoring system, and I believe at the talk you were speaking of it with regard to verifying INDCs. Could you say a little bit more about how that might work? How would you be able to measure carbon from a particular country, for example?
So I don't actually have a good answer because you really haven't studied it from the monitoring point of view. And you know, one of the attractive aspects of the NDCs is that it's allowed a range of options to actually flourish and bubble up, bottom up. So it really depends on, you know, what individual countries are doing with respect to, you know, point source capture. Is it ocean-based sequestration, land-based sequestration? So there's a broad range of ways that the nations are meeting their NDCs. But again, you know, we haven't looked at it from the point of, it's not going to be a space-based system unto itself. It's not going to be a ground-based system unto itself. It's going to be a hybrid of those two based on the range of solutions that the nations are coming forward. As a community, we just haven't thought about it just yet.
Next question.
Hi, Casey Deemer with Live Science. A lot of the conversation during the panel was focused on kind of these longer term effects, and obviously we do have that delay in terms of the Paris Agreement beginning. But what do you want to see in the more immediate future? Like, what do we want to see in 2017, 2018? What can we get started now to ensure that these things can be met once those timelines come into play?
Well, I think that one of the things that all of us want to see is the pieces in place that are going to incentivize the research into these elements that we see necessary for the future. Some of those are new technologies on the energy side, and those need to be, not only do they need to be developed, they need to be analyzed and studied. So that's one piece. The monitoring system that Tony talked about is not in place. We need to design it, we need to develop it, we need to exercise that. I think that another piece is that we need to start talking about what kind of a framework we develop to allow countries to gain confidence in each other's commitment. So monitoring is one piece, but what are the kinds of discussions and agreements that move forward to get people talking about that? The UNFCCC has focused primarily on developing an agreement. They haven't focused on what do we do once we've got an agreement to ensure that people are walking down that road. And then finally, we've talked about the need for really looking at adaptation and the research associated with that.
And I just add, I mean, the bottom line is if we're to stay under the 2-degree threshold, we need to bend the curve, meaning we need to reach peak emissions and then reduce that over the next 4 years.
Next question. Do we have any questions from the chat? No? Any more questions from reporters in the room? All right, then that will conclude our media availability, and we'll resume again at 5 p.m.